Welcome back, everyone. This is Zach. I am your host for EM Weekly, and this week I am joined by Doug Bruce. Doug, hello.
Hey, Zach. Thanks for having me.
I'm very happy to have you. And the reason I'm happy to have you is because so there's been a lot of discussion, particularly on LinkedIn, which I'm a lurker on LinkedIn. In fact, that's where we kind of connected.
Sure.
There's been sort of this debate over the last, I don't know, since emergency management was defined as to what an emergency manager is. And recently that debate has sort of been rekindled, and I've attempted to sort of stir up trouble in this discussion. But one of the things that comes up is just how diverse of a sort of profession we are. Like there's all these sort of different end goals and procedures to get there. And one of the things that
I think you just won a jackpot.
My soundboard has decided I had a good idea there and is highlighting it.
If you hear rumbling on my end, Austin's undergoing the ice storm right now. So
yeah.
I could hear it all falling off the roof outside. It sounds like there's...
Oh, that's great. So we are actually about to have minus 45 degree weather. So in pure emergency management fashion, Doug and I are dragging through technical difficulties while also enduring natural weather phenomena. So we are truly emergency managers. Where I was trying to go with this long-winded discussion before my weird chimes interrupted me was that there are different emergency management positions out there for almost everyone. And I think as the profession has evolved and people have recognized the value of emergency managers, more fields are starting to build their niche emergency manager. Doug has probably one of the, I think, the most interesting and fun emergency management roles that I have found. And I will let him sort of define that. But you're an emergency manager for events, fun stuff, concerts, performances, shows. What do you do? Like, it just sounds so awesome.
Well, in the day and age that we work in, crisis is not as borderline defined as it used to be. It used to sort of be something like a wildfire that was dealt with and managed, natural disaster, technology. But now we're sort of living in this world where there's all this potential for disaster around us and the convergence.
I work on crisis, I think, is what everybody's
perma crisis or poly crisis, multiple things that have interdependencies coming together at the same time. I work in the world of live events. So I'm a safety professional. I consider myself a safety advisor. It falls under areas like security, under safety, under risk management. A lot of it's being on site and working with clients or artists or promoters to make sure their events are safe. They have good plans, taking sort of that active risk management step. A lot of it can be planning and it can be debriefing and doing after action stuff as well.
We're going to take a quick break with some words from our sponsors.
How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. Instinct Ready kits are awesome, compact, fully loaded, and easy to place around your office, school, campus, warehouse, wherever. I keep a quick pack in my vehicle and one at home. Imagine Instinct Ready, fully loaded Stop the Bleed kits in every school and office. Get Instinct Ready kits and training at InstinctReady.com.
But when you say live events, you're talking about some of like the biggest and like coolest events that exist. I mean, globally, right? You're not just in the U.S., right?
Well, I'm really fortunate because I get to work on an international scale with a bunch of the colleagues I work with, and so some of the events may be in the UK. We've done events in Saudi Arabia, like Formula One, and I spend a lot of my time in the U.S. I live in Austin, and we work with promoters that have massive events and small events at the same time. There's risk on every level, whether you're doing 100,000 people or 100, and it's about working with whoever the client is to make sure they've sort of foreseen what can go wrong, and then they've taken action to make sure that they have protected their people or their staff or their crowds with that appropriate duty of care.
And like the staff could be fellow bandmates. It could be, in fact, when we first sort of like chatted, I think we connected on LinkedIn, and then I was in New York City.
It was New York Comic Con.
Yeah, I was in New York City for New York Comic Con. I get a message, hey, I just saw your New York, because I'm one of those people who like, I'd much rather, I like posting like landscape stuff, like if I'm out like doing stuff. And I think I took a picture from inside the Comic-Con, and I was just like, wow, this is incredible. Like, I can't imagine the security apparatus and everything that sort of takes to make this happen. And it was like maybe a couple hours later, I get a message like, hey, I don't know you per se, but I'm actually right down the street from you at the Madison Square Garden for a very large event, and let's see if we can't connect.
But I'd followed, Doberman and others for a long time. I think it's really important to be aware of what other emergency managers are doing and to take that first step sometimes and reach out and build your network. And it doesn't always mesh, but
well, and how do we often meet? Like, it's kind of funny. Like, it's all this like we are out in the world doing all this stuff, and then like those connections can happen in all sorts of weird ways. This was like this very like funny just meeting up, because you're from Austin, I'm from Northern Vermont. Like, there's not that many times that we're probably going to accidentally find ourselves in the same city, and it just so happens we did. Now, due to other life circumstances and other disasters going on in my own realm at the time, we weren't able to actually connect. But since then, we've been in touch and we've chatted a bunch of times, and it sort of made me much more interested. And so I think for those who like are in the starting process, or maybe even interested in sort of like shifting, from one emergency management field to another, how did you get into this world? Like, this seems like it's a great question, niche. So
I think let's use the premise of New York Comic Con as as a background, which of course I'm not professionally affiliated with, but I was there representing a major insurer. They had a sponsorship booth, and the reptile animated creature that is sort of their mascot gets up.
See if you guys can count through the lines there.
But I was there running this booth, and we're running the promotion and working with the staff and doing planning aspects, and then deploying trailers and walkthroughs and premiums, giveaways, stuff like that. Which was, one of the things I did in my former life as an event producer.
And how long ago was that?
It was about 6 years ago. My life in the event world is probably about 15 years long, but it spanned a number of different areas. At some point, maybe around 2006 or so, that feeling of polycrisis, of permacrisis, just kind of never went away. It felt like every time you turn on the news or open up your phone, there's like just something else, right? And so I went back to school for a master's degree in emergency management. And the academic stuff in the textbook is really important, and you have to learn your theory and your history. But I got involved volunteering. I tried everything I could. I got involved in ham radio, got involved in local CERT. I became an outreach trainer, went out and shadowed search and rescue teams, all of the stuff and all the skill building that would help with, that entire range of emergency management. And as I became a safety professional and progressed in my career, the emergency management aspects of what we do, prevention, preparedness, mitigation, and ultimately recovery or sort of wrapping up events, has been really important.
So your path, it's funny. There seems to be this there's like almost three worlds that people come from for emergency management. You have like your public safety realm, which I did a lot of volunteer EMS. I was even a deputy sheriff for a little while. There's the like now sort of like purist emergency manager. Those are the folks I think like I would define as like coming sort of straight through the academic world and then coming out, sort of credentialed or having a degree in it. It sort of qualifies them. And then I find more and more people who like were in entertainment of some kind and like event stuff and then find their way in that way. In fact, there was somebody I just saw on LinkedIn and hopefully they're listening and can point out, but they were describing how in their LinkedIn profile, because they took a look at mine and, it's like when dogs are sniffing each other's butts. Like, who are you? Who are you? Are we friends? And so we're looking at, he's looking at mine, I'm looking at his. And at the bottom of it was like, theater production, and then FAO Schwartz soldier, like the dressed up soldier. And I was like, oh, we've all sort of like, like this entertainment world sort of like seems to be where a lot of people start. And then we end up in crisis, which I guess if like anyone who's sort of worked in entertainment, it feels like it's a constant crisis anyway.
Well, crisis is one word. I think the other side of it is you've kind of got this parallel, these dynamic situations. They're always changing. You're working with different people, different resources coming in, coming out. So I couldn't say it's the same thing, but that skill set where you're sort of never in a static place that event producers, for better or for worse, find themselves in, applies well. And then on the sort of macro level, organizing resources and housing and taking care of people on mass scale is absolutely an emergency management skill set. A lot of the weird entertainment skills that I've had and I've gained, knowing what gaff tape is and knowing how to drive and work forklifts.
Managers would love gaff tape. It's the greatest thing ever. You can do everything with it.
Well, and some of the INTs now deploy with it. That was an example of someone's like, "What is this?" And it's like, "I've got a box in my garage." And I know that we have similar video production backgrounds and stuff. You would know what that is. So that's just an example. The skill set's broadly applicable. So that's not to devalue the first responder experience or the military experience that people come into emergency management with. If anything, we just add flavor to that.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's stinging me again.
If you wanted another jackpot.
I'm about to have a great idea. Everyone pay attention. This is going to be good. The emergency, like especially sort of like people who come from the event side, like you are often just putting out lots of fires and you have to be very quick on your feet and resourceful. And that's why I like gaffer's tape. Like this is almost like the perfect example. Like your gaffer's tape is you can tie down, your devices. You can like literally you could hang cameras with it. You can, hide stuff with it. It's safe. You can tape down all of your wires and everything with it. It's just a super useful tape that you can do everything with. And that's like almost a skill set in itself that we want for emergency managers. But like, I think you're just like such a generalist and you have to sort of, especially for folks who are not working in massive productions to start with, right? Like it might be a handful of people. And, if the scaffolding falls, like you need to know how to put that back up. And if the light fails, you need to know how to like replace the bulb or put the gobos in there and all the other stuff that like, people have to do in the event. And then
emergency managers have to sometimes do a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you take these small shops, these one-man band,
which is like 90% of them probably, like a huge portion.
Right. Yeah. They're underfunded. They're working long hours. Many counties have one or two people. And so that, those folks have to master a lot of skills. And I wouldn't directly compare that to somebody who, works in the arts, but I can see parallels.
Oh yeah, 100%. And actually, so we know sort of how you got to where you are. I guess, how is that field evolving? Because I imagine like, there's been some really significant events that have occurred probably over the last, really the last 20 years, we've just had so many like large event, tragedies. And of course, historically, there's been lots more, but I feel like the focus probably mostly because of like social media and stuff. So there was the Travis Scott concert's probably like one of the most recent ones that sort of like pops up in people's heads where they had the crushing incident. There's events like the Route 91 mass shooting. There's events like I'm trying to think of one of the things that so I was a higher ed emergency manager. I had to do a lot of event emergency management stuff, like a lot of pre-planning, a lot of sort of coordination. And as I was discovering this, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even know this world sort of existed. And like, I think for a lot of emergency managers, when they're thinking about events, they're thinking of it like almost from the outside. Like, what do I do if that event goes south? But the skill sets and the knowledge that you have as an event safety person are actually like super valuable in the inverse, like you helping them from the, something goes south, as well as
that's interesting, kind of lead up to like what you guys did, right?
Yeah.
Like you guys recently held a tabletop interactive.
We did.
I think in one of our previous research discussions, we sort of talked about the idea that, event professionals are doing everything they can or should be to prevent, something like, a mass casualty event. But in the event that something goes wrong and it becomes an emergency management issue for the authorities that have jurisdiction, the skill sets that you guys are helping build is really important.
Yeah, I don't think, I think there's like a disconnect out there when it comes to understanding emergency managers' roles and events. So for instance, like we were talking about, a lot of shops are very small. Like their version of planning for a large event may be like a handshake or a phone discussion, like, hey, if you need my help, call me. Let's hope nothing bad happens. Maybe describe like how your position, interacts, and maybe like the things that you're thinking about that like the emergency managers who are on the outside and watching it, maybe aren't even aware of or should be aware of, that you're doing, and then information that you could provide them in the event of an emergency or even just pre-emergency, planning or day of, just sort of like keeping that communication going.
All right. So the first thing is you want to meet your authorities and your public safety officials and let them know what kind of planning you have going on. You want to get those permits. You want to put all of your plans in written form. If you're not sure what kind of risks you're facing, talk with them. They're going to be very helpful, and they have a lot of knowledge that they can assist with.
Is there like standard planning? Like, are you using like ICS 201s or how do you sort of like, how do you translate that information? Because I think that's like sometimes the trouble is like, if you may have a planning structure that you use in the event space that isn't necessarily there, where like that translation either doesn't occur and should occur, or, like they don't have a Doug Bruce there who has an emergency management background. But like, how are events sort of like, is there a process that you sort of see like that's, again, maybe not standardized, but sort of common?
Well, that's a really good question. So I would say all events have some sort of planning documentation. Hopefully they've got an operations plan that meets, a lot of different criteria that satisfies the authorities and provides a lot of that information like you'd eventually, want to see in that 201 or into an incident action plan. Some event producers, and I don't want to speak for myself. I mean, I've met a lot of great ones. This goes back to the networking bit. People that are in charge of stadiums or, run routine mass amounts of people into games. They'll do things like build an IEP like game day plan. So it's got, weather information and resourcing assignments. It's kind of translatable across the board.
And you see that evolving now, like just sort of with that whole, whatever you want to call it, the polycrisis, permacrisis, blah, blah, blah. Just this sort of like feeling like there's threats from all directions all the time.
Well, I think the planning process is always evolving, and I think people are getting better about understanding the risks that they might face, unfortunately, because we've lived through them. I think there's definitely a lot of event producers who want to do the right thing and want to, share their information and put it into a way that's digestible to authorities or other figures who might need that in the planning process.
What about for folks that might be listening who are either interested in going straight into the sort of event safety space or, moving from emergency management into that? Are there like qualifications, standards, credentials that they can get that can assist them? I know when we were talking, you have like a very unique, I think, certification in this world.
Well, if you want to see things from the perspective of, where event professionals focused on safety start, I'd say, join the Event Safety Alliance, for example, or the Global Crowd Management Alliance. Those are two organizations that are doing great work, putting out, ANSI standards and the Event Safety Guide. You could read that material and see how it applies to the events that are either in your jurisdiction or how authorities might look at your event if you're an event producer. So starting there is really important. Another great resource is the Texas A&M Systems TEACS, the extension service. TEACS goes around the country with DHS-funded coursework, and they do a tremendous job of teaching people how to assess risk and, think about their stakeholders and, start to build those really comprehensive.
Yeah, I've taken some courses through NCS 4, I believe, which I think is out of it's either Mississippi. Yeah, it's Mississippi. Yeah.
And I've taken a lot of their coursework. It's very,
it's good. Like I think it's geared if I'm correct, it's more geared towards sort of sports venues and stuff, I think, specifically, but has also like, I was able to use a lot of sort of that skill set in there as well. And like that, I think because that's like driven very much by emergency managers, like it's like maybe a good place to start in that sense.
It would be on the public safety side. The coursework is very much, seems to me, to be sort of written from it's both the public safety perspective and it's also sort of the permit venue kind of perspective. Now, that's not to disqualify it. I mean, sure, everything in there can apply to, somebody who might produce a different kind of event, and it's probably scalable, but it's definitely, in my opinion, has some of that foundation of, mass venues.
Yeah. And, again, you sort of think every disaster is local, right? Like an event is essentially like the microcosm of whatever community it's in. It's going to have diverse populations of people there. There's going to be a lot of different, you're going to have essentially all the emergency support functions that you'd have in a real EOC. You're going to have all of the community aspects that you have in, there's food, there's shelter, there's sanitation, infrastructure, transportation, like all of this stuff.
Weather. Just weather, weather, a high wind action plan, understanding how your structure will be affected by forces, and what actions you need to take at what time.
My phone is absolutely blowing up right now. So on top
you must have had a really good idea.
Yeah. What is happening right now? Again, this is like, I don't know, maybe we're like two black clouds and we should not be in the same, like even virtual space. They just canceled our school because of the extreme cold temperatures. We have a high, or I'm getting warnings for the wind chill, as well as everyone now asking what is going on and like, what does this mean? And do we need to do anything about this? And then school just got canceled. So I am absolutely blowing up. I'm going to just shut everything up here. I'm a relatively new Apple person, and like trying to get all of this to work is like new to me, but I really like it. But then like when stuff like this, where I'm like, I think I'm on Do Not Disturb, and I'm like, I've got my iPad here, my phone, my watch. I'm like, this whole environment is starting to drive me nuts. But anyways, so that's the event management that I'm doing in my life right now. Is we have my
it's a good background for an event safety aspect, which is figuring out those triggers ahead of time. Whether it's weather or crowd related issues. Figuring out if you get to a certain point, a certain threshold, how much time will it take to evac your venue? That's how much time plus a safety factor that you need to make a decision. If a storm's coming or there's a threat of lightning.
And what about the challenges of that? So like you're in like I think you specifically, because it's a little bit different if maybe there isn't a Doug Bruce or someone in your position at the event, you have to essentially be the middle ground, I would imagine, if like the city, county, emergency management, public safety, fire chief or whatever is there, they're going to lean into like, please don't destroy our city. Please keep it safe. You've got sort of the political side, like a mayor or some other sort of like leadership who are like, well, we have this huge event in our city. We want to like make everyone feel welcome and like not make it feel like it's this like fortress of security and safety. And then you have the event leadership who are like, we want this to run smoothly. We want everyone to have a good time. And if it doesn't go well, we could be out a lot of money. Like if we have to cancel or like whatever, that could cost everyone who's sort of organizing it a lot of money. And then the event doesn't happen, which is the ultimate like failure, right? Like you're not failure, but like the worst outcome is you have to cancel for some reason. And now no one's having a good time. And all the planning is like either delayed or never, it's never going to happen. You got all these sort of like competing interests. How do you balance that? And like, what do you sort of, I guess, how do you just like keep everyone happy? The plate's spinning, if you will.
Gosh, that's that has a lot of layers. I think to rule out,
just cancel them all individually, beat them.
It's a lot of plates smear. No, I think the first thing to sort of clarify is, so I'm not necessarily the decision maker. Sometimes my role is to just help the client come to those decisions in the planning process, or realize what considerations they should undertake. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a rule, because situations are dynamic. Now, to your question, when you get, competing interests where you might have an economic interest, of an event producer versus maybe, somebody who for whatever reason or whoever they represent, have a different standard or a different idea of the way they want to do things.
Sure.
I think it's very much about, being reasonable and figuring out what is truly the safest option, as a reasonable step. But the actual safest thing to do, the most safe thing you could do in an event is pack it up and go home and nobody's there to gather, because inherently, events have risks, but promoters have undertaken those. And I think they should understand some of those risks, whether it's weather or, other related factors when they invite people into their event.
That is something, I think that is like an acknowledgement that is fairly new. So I remember, I've been to a lot of like sporting events like growing up, and concerts. Like I have a lot of family that are involved in music around New Orleans and stuff, and they go around the country. Used to get to go to like all sorts of jazz fests around the region and stuff. And I don't remember there being an emphasis on safety at a lot of those. It was like almost like just this like, we're going to do it and hopefully no one gets hurt, nothing bad happens. Now I'm going to like juxtapose that to some recent events that I've gone to where it is front and center. It is very clear, like, hey, if this happens, here's where to get information. Here's where your nearest exit are. We're hoping nothing bad happens, but, see something, say something. Like people are much more upfront and communicate it. And I feel like it's sort of silly. And I've fought this in my personal, role as an emergency manager working with events, is like, it's okay to acknowledge the risk and just let people know if something happens, this is how we're going to communicate with you, and here's what you should do. And sometimes even now I still get some pushback on like, well, then people are going to think something is up, right? Like, are you going to scare them and they're maybe not going to want to participate, or they're going to be too freaked out to enjoy the event?
Well, I've heard this discussed in a number of ways. I have a couple of opinions on it. When you get on an airplane, they always give you the safety briefing at the beginning, and that airline safety is generally pretty safe. There are so many layers. There's so much maintenance. There's so much training. There's so much upkeep. There's so much awareness, that actually you're pretty safe on an airplane, but that doesn't mean they don't still give you safety instructions. And I think that sometimes, giving people those resources or telling them where the exits are, or, doing that pre-show briefing, whether it's staff or whether it's your audience, still has a very reasonable place. But as you pointed out, there is a balance, whether a touring act, for example, wants to set a mood, or like you've walked into a theater and the theater has a certain aesthetic and it's lit a certain way. Those are very conscious decisions that those designers have made. And, they don't want to interrupt that with, perhaps what could be seen as distracting.
Yeah, like the suspension of disbelief is now gone because the reality. Although I'll say, so I'll give a good example. When we did one of our trainings, we were in Atlanta, and we went to the Atlanta Braves stadium, which is a relatively new, like modern stadium. And their safety video was like just kind of like built in. And it was, of course, like the dorkiest thing ever. There's like, 30 of us as emergency managers that went to this baseball game, and they start the safety video, and we're all like captivated by it because we're like, this is great. Like they're communicating it in a way that like doesn't make it feel like something bad's going to happen, but like people will at least have a basic understanding. Like the ushers are there to help us, and that's where we're going to go, and we're going to just file out. And then they made it fun.
It can be done in a creative way.
Yeah, like keep it built in. Yeah, and you notice that it like, I think in like it's sort of like the Disneyfication of emergency management or public safety, event safety. Like when you go to Disney World, you don't see all of that, but it's all there. Same with events. Like when I've gone to major events, like actually that's not true. Sometimes it's not there, and it's the reason you don't feel it there is because there is nothing there. The ones that are really good and well planned, it's all there. The infrastructure is there should something go awry, but you just don't sort of see it.
Well, it's interesting from the security perspective. I mean, entertainment organizations that have a very high brand standard sometimes, sort of bake in their security aspects. And They do it through design. So you could be walking through a space that's keeping you safe in a number of ways and not even know about it. And, that I think a lot of organizations take a look at the way that they make an impression, yet they have to have security screening and things like that.
So,
and to the listener audience, I'm sorry, there's a lag between me and Zach, so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the movie theaters now. I mean, the last just in movie theater, they gave you probably, at the beginning with that intro video, whether you remember it or not or realize it, but it builds that muscle memory a little bit. So I don't think it's. I'm personally of the opinion that safety can be done well and it can be done in an interesting way.
Yeah, I think that is something all of us, like there was a period of time, especially like we're close enough to New York City that we go for weekend trips. Like we used to go all the time. And I just remember for like a long time, they had I think they called them Hercules teams, which are like, it's NYPD. I think they're like ESU, and they're all like, literally they're in their full battle rattle, like walking around. All of a sudden there's like cruisers everywhere and there's nothing happening, but it's like this supposed to be this like presentation of like security and authority, and we're there.
Like a show of force.
Yeah, just a giant show of force, and just let everyone know, like, don't mess with us. And I think we got so used to that after 9/11, and like, I think it doesn't really, I don't think, work that well anymore because we're like kind of numb to it. And it also is like just making a society that is just constantly anxious about like something happening. And I feel like this is a debate that I've had with some events where, we had people who were like, well, we need to have like fully armed, kitted up, police officers present to just send the message, don't mess with us. And it was like, will that actually prevent anything? I mean, that's a response thing. It's too late at that point. Like, you're better off.
Well, there's another number of things, right? There's building barriers, there's deterring, there's devaluing targets, there's, the idea that maybe those people are sending a message or perhaps they're just there because that's what tactic was chosen. And I can't speak to policing efforts because I'm not a cop, but what I can tell you is that I think there are, ways of keeping people safe, whether it's obvious or not. And sometimes that relies on technology. Sometimes that relies on some of the new screening methods that are available. There's venues experimenting right now with facial recognition and social media monitoring and open gate metal detectors, as well as the traditional screening mechanisms where you walk through a metal detector and then have your bag searched. It just depends, and I think it has to be appropriate to the profile of the event. If it's a community art festival or a strawberry festival on a Saturday morning, it needs to have some level of security, but, it probably has to have a reasonable trade-off, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, because I think it was in El Paso where there was literally the Strawberry Fest shooting that they had down there where you're like, what would you even do? It's a giant open space. Like, that's sort of the alternative is like, I guess, an acceptable level of risk. And we all do that calculus every single day, right? Like if you're a small business owner, for instance, maybe you don't have an alarm in your building because, you're like, it's not going to work, or it's a nuisance. That works up, of course, to the Madison Square Gardens as well. Like, this is great. This maybe would prevent one more incident, possibly. So do we spend $1 billion and have drop down metal gates that secure everyone in here and robots come from the sky and, fight off the bad guy? Like, could you do that?
Well, there's a lot of things, right? I mean, you drive over those plates. If you've ever been on a military base,
yes,
you just kind of, look at me and say, well, that's
the on one this weekend. I got drill.
So you've got the hostile vehicle mitigation there.
Yeah.
But this week there was something in the news where it worked for a base. They triggered it within seconds. It deployed, and it probably mitigated a lot of risk. And in a sense, I think there's a number of tools that are available. But to clarify for you and I guess for our discussion for your audience, my job is to be aware of security measures. But a lot of what I deal with is more, I'd say, holistic risk. Occupational health and safety hazards and the use of the space and how are we building structures and, what are some of the interconnected aspects? How are we using the tools at our disposal and how are we using the people that are a part of that building that event?
So I guess in that sense, thinking about your career and like stuff that you dealt with, like what are some like big lessons learned from like maybe incidents that you've gone through, like stuff that was like, oh man, I hadn't thought of that, or just like aha moments in your career that maybe you could like shed some light on, like just stuff that like people maybe wouldn't experience but could be really beneficial to just kind of think through.
Well, I think first of all, when I look back on my career, I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of great people. So don't undervalue the network you have and keeping those relationships up. That's a first point. I think another thing is, if you're an event producer, talk to your insurers or talk to your local stakeholders. They're going to have a lot of insight that you wouldn't maybe find it another way or come up with on your own.
When you're saying insurers, like, because you actually brought that up a couple times, I think that's a really like are those the folks who sort of are doing that calculus, in some ways, or like how does that actually play into? Because I think that is really interesting, and that maybe is another resource that like emergency managers could reach out to. Like, what type of insurer is sort of responsible for an event? Like, is there like a brand out there that they could like maybe reach out to have them talk to them? Or,
well, without giving any proper nouns, I mean, there are a number of organizations that do understand events and are happy to take some of that risk on and work with you to develop live entertainment. I would recommend the Event Safety Alliance as a resource because, of course, they're not exactly an insurer. They're just a body of professionals who share information. But, they have some people they recommend within their sponsorship. I don't necessarily represent insurers, but I think they're a really important part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like even in the stuff that I've done, like so we had like our risk management folks, which I think were sort of like representative of that perspective or whatever. But I think that's also a group that is kind of not thought of as part, like bringing them to the table for like planning events and stuff. Like I think a lot of times those discussions maybe happen internally at the event planning. But like when the time comes for the fire and police chiefs and any special teams that are going to show up, sometimes those folks aren't in the room, and it's like for an emergency manager, you may want to be like, hey, is your risk manager or someone from your organization's insurance or risk management, could they maybe show up to this event or talk through things, because there's a handshake there that could be really valuable. I think particularly like from, like you said, the OSHA safety stuff, probably from some of the physical safety structures and things like that. But then also it's just a different perspective that maybe we're not getting in the general public safety meeting.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, whether it's a risk manager or somebody else who's a partner of your organization, and this applies to even, non-event organizations.
Yeah.
Those folks have a tremendous amount of knowledge and are there ultimately as a resource to talk about, whether it's occupational health and safety, as you referenced, or they might have those relationships with the insurers. They might understand how many people have been, hurt in the past and what's been logged or what the, your sort of rate of injury is within your organization. They're a tremendous resource, and it really does it does behoove you to get in the room with them if you're an emergency manager, if you have a massive event, and talk to those folks, because they can help guide some of those conversations. And in theory, they also know who a lot of the players are and who on the day of will be responsible for making those decisions, whether it's weather or postponement or emergency announcements, things like that.
Yeah, there's that's a really good point. So the the team of teams, the networks of networks within networks. When we were doing our training, we were really fortunate. We've had a lot of like time to sort of sit and work through some of this stuff with people who were either attending the training or people that we met throughout the training because we were holding it in their venue or something. And one of the things that I think it was specifically through MLS, because we had a couple folks from Major League Soccer at the training in Orlando, was that they're like, yeah, like you sometimes the public safety people forget that when we're doing our calculus in the background, there's another command center that is actually like looking at the big picture and taking all the information that we're giving them they're looking at things that we're not even considering. They're looking down the schedule over the next 3 months. If they cancel this game, that screws up the whole season. And maybe these two teams don't have time to actually come back together, which means perhaps they don't enter the championship, because they're not going to make playoffs or something else along those lines. And that's why, like, when you're making these decisions, because again, I think a lot of us are much more comfortable, like you said, what's the safest thing you do? You shut it down, pack it up, and go home. I think from a public safety side, like, it's much easier for us to sort of justify that. But that's just also sort of like, it's not realistic when you're talking about some of these events. And if you don't understand everything that's going on the other side, that's not to say, like, let's not make a safe decision because it might screw up the playoffs. But, like, we may not also understand, like, what the capabilities are of the facility, of the personnel that are there. These discussions need to be had. They need to be maintained. And I'm sure in your perspective, you've probably seen, public safety folks who are like, we can't do this. And you're like, let's talk it out, because I think we can, and we can do it safely, and we can make it. There's a middle ground here that actually is probably better than one extreme or the other. So let's figure this out. So how do you sort of, I guess, maybe like have those, when is the time to have those conversations, and how do you have them?
Well, I think talking about what resources will be available and how it's being managed and how that structure looks, the time to have that conversation is ahead of the event. That's in the planning stages, a couple of months out. Once an event has happened in a jurisdiction, maybe, those authorities will have a little bit of a better understanding of how it works and who's involved and how much they might be able to manage. And just to go back and correct myself, not packing it up and sending it home, but the objectively safest thing, I have to explain my own joke, which would be to not have an event, gather those people. But actually, sometimes cases where once it's underway, depending on the hazard that's becoming present, maybe just keeping everybody at the event is the safest thing to do. Those are really tough.
That is a great point. All right, so I'm going to give a scenario here. So again, higher ed emergency manager, often involved in lots of events daily. This is like, there's 3 emergency managers that, like, I think are the most, these are the folks that I want in my EOC. An event emergency manager, a campus emergency manager, and a healthcare emergency manager. These are folks that, like, you own it from the minute it starts till resolution, and everything in between. And so being a higher ed emergency manager, I was on campus, and we had a big basketball game. It was, I believe, the playoffs. I don't think it was like the conference championship, but it was a big game. There was a full house. And fortunately for those, like, they're fairly easy. We had a small stadium, not a big deal. It's like just a few thousand people. So not a huge deal. It's Vermont. Like, our basketball program is pretty small. And as I'm leaving, get on the highway, and we always kind of track weather because we have a huge transportation system that we got to deal with. We're at the busiest intersection in the entire state of Vermont. That's where everybody has to travel back and forth between parking. There's buses, and we have this huge thing that we have to build and do for every single basketball game. And I am noticing that the roads are a nightmare, and not just bad. Like, we're Northerners, like, we're used to driving. I know you guys down in the South right now are learning how bad it can be. It sounds like Austin's got some pretty safe.
I grew up in Wisconsin. I know how to drive this.
Yeah. Well, you're probably driving around like, oh my gosh, these people are going to, all crash and kill each other. So, like, you don't know bad driving until you are on thick black ice, and there's absolutely nothing that is going to be done to make this situation better in the short term. Like, it's the scenario where you just don't want to drive. So as I'm here, I'm like, at first I'm like thinking my own safety. I'm like, this is really scary. Like, I'm an experienced winter driver, and this is as bad as I've driven in years. And so all of a sudden the whole highway comes to a stop, and there's accidents everywhere. People are getting stuck on hills. Like, you just can't move. And so I'm like, oh God, how does this affect the campus? Because now I'm stuck in the car just thinking, and I'm like, uh-oh, basketball game. So I call the police, I call our dispatch to find out who's on scene. Give the I think it was one of our sergeants was sort of running our public safety, command post there. I give them a call, and I was like, is the parking person right with you? Do you have the athletic director? And can you just get them all together right now? So he gathers them all up. And I'm like, it is really, really bad outside. I know the game's almost over. We've got to keep everyone here. Figure it out. And they're like, but people are going to want to go. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. They're not going anywhere. Like, we shouldn't even let them out the door. Like, it's probably not even safe to walk to their cars right now. And so they made an announcement and they figured it out really fast. And it was like one of those things that like we planned for how to get people out of the building really quickly. We hadn't really planned for what do we do when we need them to stay there for a long time and there's nothing going on. And so they kind of just came up with some announcements and some entertainment. They had music, you know, they kept, I think, the food open a little bit later than they normally would have. And thankfully, it's Vermont. We're all very nice people. So you said you're from the Midwest, so you know, nice people. They're like, all right, well, that's fine. We don't want to cause any trouble. So we'll just hang out here. And after about, I think they had to stay there for almost an hour. Finally, they had managed to sort of like get enough salt and stuff. And I think the temperature raised enough that it like resolved itself. But, you know, it's just one of those things where you're like, yeah, your solution is like, oh, we just get everyone out of here.
Well, one of the things that I ask myself, and not always, but, you know, there has to be a measurement that the solution you're providing doesn't create a bigger risk or more risk than what you're trying to protect.
That's a huge line right there. That's like the line of the show. Like we should probably foot stomp that.
But it's relative, right? And you're talking about weather or traffic. It's a very dynamic situation. You know, so it's you know, those are like the tabletop scenarios where it's like, well, I need more information, but you know, my knee-jerk reaction is this. And event producers in the past have done things to where, you know, they'll put a DJ on for a little bit longer, or they'll use lighting or effects to draw people to another stage if, you know, if crowding is a concern. You know, there's all these different metrics, and for what it's worth, I think it's important to realize that there's a lot of solutions on the table. Just ask, just discuss, but then be willing to make that decision and don't get stuck in paralysis by analysis.
Yeah. Oh man, there's like there's this conversation could go on forever. I'm like fascinated. And even like we had a list of things that we wanted to talk about, but I'm like every single thing that you say, I'm like, oh, this is an aha moment. I want to go deeper into this. Maybe for the sake of time, because we're almost at an hour already. What are some things that maybe you're anticipating? So, you know, I hate the sort of like, let's look back on the last year and look forward to this year type of episodes, even though we did one. And it was actually, it was all right. But I want to know sort of like, what are maybe some things now looking forward that you're either like, could be technologies, it could be like, you know, types of events or things that you're thinking about, you know, in the future, like what maybe top 5 things you can think about.
Oh, you're going to edit me out for sounding like a nerd, but you know what? One of the things I'm excited about is people are getting more excited about safety, especially when they understand that it's not just about somebody with a clipboard saying, well, this is the rule and, you know, figure wag, don't do that. But actually it's about coming to the table and building those decision teams and really building that command group or that command team up front of the event and sharing opinions and ideas and experiences and having coffee with people that see a different side of things. So all of that information coming together into guidance like ANSI standards. There's a number of them that have come out recently that are giving really concrete but valuable guidance on crowd management and weather decision making and rigging and other security, other aspects of events. Those are coming out this year, if not already. And that kind of stuff actually excites me.
That's awesome. I'm actually, I was not aware of the ANSI stuff. ANSI, for people who are listening who maybe don't know, that's a international standards process. I can't remember the actual what it stands for. You could look it up. They really like look up the number and then it will then provide that standard. And they standardize everything. But I will try to find those, or Doug, if you happen to know them, I'll put that in the
we can link some of those.
Yeah, and the other the event. Oh my gosh, I already forgot the name of it. The Alliance,
the Event Safety Guide. We'll link to TEACS and some of the other resources. Yeah.
That's those. What about technology? Is there stuff that like you're excited for that might sort of like just build that safety envelope in a way that we don't have now?
Well, the technology, elephant in the room, I think, is a lot of these AI materials that are coming out. There's
Are you guys using ChatGPT?
No, but here's one way it might really help you. If you're not a really good writer and you want to create a succinct script or, some marketing material that could help there, you don't want to put your emergency planning in the hands of, an AI bot, but the idea of using it to help you generate material that reaches out to people in the advance of an event is an interesting use. Yeah, there's also a lot of visual stuff coming out now that, will assist venues in the way they're run and the way they're managed.
What about, because I think it's something that we are finally like paying our due, it's still nowhere near what it should be, but like thinking of safety in sort of the perspective of like the language issues, folks who may have mobility concerns, just the sort of like the, making events like equitable and sort of available to everyone.
Okay, so here's one. So like we have events where sometimes we put messages, if you need to alert an audience, you might use the voice of God, you might use the PA, you might have an announcer or a host or an MC make an announcement. You might use mobile notifications. You might put it up on the video screen. But what if, I don't know, I'm just thinking off the cuff, but what if, for example, you had that, maybe it's in the primary couple languages, but then there's, a QR code and it translates it to your phone or for you if maybe you don't speak the language as well. I went, this is a great safety story. I went to Italy and my wife and I took a cruise and we went to a safety brief and the muster stations and all this. And the entire thing was in Italian and I don't speak Italian. So, it was kind of like a learning mechanism for me.
Yeah.
You're like, well, okay, so this is critical information that I'm not getting. How are we going to fix this?
Yeah, that's a great example, like just something very simple. Because I would think that if the ship is sinking, having that information in some sort of translation or visual description. I know, like, so in mass notification, this is like we're just sort of figuring it out, but like most of the new systems now have some built-in translation, or like people are basically going in and manipulating it so that you can. Whoever, whatever language people are using, are identifying as their primary, that they can do it. And then even like sometimes I think like, you could spend all day and translate it a million different ways, but like a lot of folks can speak English. It's not necessarily that they don't have the ability. It's just like there's English, and then there's like American English, and there's, how you word stuff, the theirs, like that for a foreign speaker, like those are three different words and they sound the exact same. So like, being very conscientious of even just like how you frame it in English can be a huge help. But certainly like, I've noticed a lot of concerts now have, different ways that they're displaying it for people who, are hard of hearing or blind, like navigating their ways through, wayfinding through crowds just in general, is difficult. If you have, some sort of hearing or visual challenges, that means in an emergency, if there's not some way to sort of like calculate and think about those people or mobility issues, they're left in the middle of where was a crowd. And now you've got to figure out how to like keep them safe. And hopefully, I'm sure you are, like, what do we do in that situation? And we've talked about it with graduation, because we know we had a bunch of people, we get 20,000 people on campus, and we're like, one of the exercises that we did during my last event was, I would do a tabletop from a lesson learned the previous year. That would be like, whatever went really, really badly, we're going to tabletop that this year. So months ahead, we can start to test it, and then we'll have it built into the plan. And we were like, cool, we'll evacuate everything. But we're like, there's a lot of older folks that attend those graduations. And if we tell everyone just, you need to leave right now because of bomb threat, gunshots, severe weather, they may not be able to actually get to that spot. So how do we get them there, and how do we do it safe? Is there ways to put them in spots where they're closer, and, all these things that we unfortunately had thought of, but maybe not as in depth as we should have over, a long period of time. I think that that's an exciting area where, those AI, could potentially, you type it in one spot and it translates it into everything, not only English to blah, 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 but like English into a dialect spoken in a way that they would understand it, because that translation is thoughtful and clear. And like you said, the visual aspect.
Well, there's the people that are responsible for crowd management with events have to think about the profile of the people who are attending, right? They have to think about what their expectation is.
Jimmy Buffett concert versus Metallica concert.
Exactly. And what the venue's like, and how long is the day? Is alcohol involved? Oh my gosh, I could go all day on that. But so that's the first aspect, that you're really thinking about that, and you're thinking about those accessibility aspects as well. That needs to be part of your crowd management planning.
Yeah, because you as an event host, like you want everybody to go there and have the same, or as close to the same experience as you can, and being thoughtful, like, and it's the same way with the emergency planning. Like, that's great if you create this like really fun, accessible event, but then when it all goes south, you haven't thought the inverse of that of like, how do you sort of undo that and get people out of there safely, then you kind of failed. But yeah, there's a lot of excitement. The physical security stuff, I really like security by design and sort of these like really interesting ideas of like hiding it. Because, again, my kids, I've got little kids, and, just things that are happening in schools right now, like, as they become more sort of fortified in their drills are just like scaring the crap out of them. And it's just like, you don't want life to be traumatic all the time. Like we have to figure out how to sort of like, find that balance. And I know it's like the pendulum swinging both ways right now to try to find that. But I think events are that one spot where we want to go and not necessarily have to feel that weight. And then, there's a lot of good guys to sort of do that in a way that we are safe, but like also allows us to be fully invested.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors. I mean, you brought up, your kids going to school, and absolutely, that spectrum of conversation right now about hardening versus other measures, so it's a really wide-ranging discussion, and I think it's a problem America needs to solve. It's really, my wife and I are about to have our first child, and the idea that they'll be going to school, thank you, but they'll be going to school in that environment is something that I've always paid attention, but now even more so.
I think.
Think about. I'm sorry. It's that lag. I apologize.
What I was going to say was and I didn't mean to cut you off. Is I think I'm going to have you back on so we can maybe talk. Like I think I'm doing what a lot of people do. I'm sort of like leaning into like the response and everything afterwards. I think I've skipped over a lot of like the before because the best way to keep an event safe is to prevent anything from happening in the first place. And like, I don't think we talked enough about
or mitigate well.
So
we could make a lot of discussions and
preparedness stuff. Cause I'm also interested, like sort of like, here's some teasers for future episodes. Like, I really want to know about like how like training event staff, like maybe what's your role in sort of like, getting folks spun up on like some basic stuff. Like are people AED trained, CPR trained? I know we had, our security people could come from our entire region. They maybe have never been in that building before, and they're getting, bussed up by the security company because they need tons of hands, but I don't know what their qualifications are. So maybe qualifications that the newer technologies, like you're talking about, new sort of like monitoring facial recognition. I know Israel, like the Israeli security apparatus is like, sort of the, I guess on the tip of the spear as far as like sort of technology and techniques. I know we sent police officers to Israel to like get trained in their techniques and stuff. What other sort of international, because Europe I know has like a whole different process of sort of their planning and stuff for events, and they may have things that we want to learn. It's like just understanding like what are things that are maybe coming down the pike with that, and then just I guess, we should have you back on and maybe tell some war stories too. We didn't really do much on war stories, but there's just like, this is like a world. And I know I sort of talked in circles throughout this. I'm just like so excited about this stuff because I think it's really fun and interesting. And it's like something that, maybe not all people sort of get what we do as emergency managers, but almost everyone has sort of been to some type of event where, they're thinking about this. So
well, and when they go to the event, hopefully, or their children or their cousin, hopefully they not only safe, they feel safe, but they know that somebody is looking out for that. I know that in your past, you were a comedian and you brought joy into people's lives, and they suspended their day to day to come and experience that and enjoy it. That's so important to the cultural aspect of our society. That's why people come to events, and protecting that and keeping that sacred is really important to me. It's really looking after the well-being of our industry and the well-being of the attendee.
That's it. That's the mic drop moment. Doug, I really, really appreciate.
Thanks for having us.
It has been fascinating. We've talked for an hour. I could go on for like 3 more hours. I just thank you again. Everyone who's listening, if you like this episode, make sure comment below. I'm definitely having Doug back on. So if you have questions, if you have thoughts, let us know, comment below, because there's going to be YouTube at some point here. Subscribe, hit the bell for alerts. I'm trying to do all the stuff that my kids influencer folks say.
Like and subscribe. Yeah, follow my channel.
Hit that, like, smash that like button. And make sure that you're leaving reviews. That helps the podcast and YouTube actually the little algorithms out there get this out to more people, because I think this is a really important conversation for emergency managers. I hope you learned, please talk to your event safety folks. Try to connect with them ahead of the event. But if nothing else, if you've got a big thing going on, just reach out. I imagine all the Doug Bruces of the world want to hear from you. So get out there.
Well, or the production manager.
Yeah, but awesome. Thanks, Doug, again. And everyone have a wonderful time listening to this, because there's just so much to learn.
Thanks again. Bye-bye. Appreciate you.